The night of November 21st, 2025 began like any other over the Black Sea, a quiet, dark expanse with only the distant hum of ships and the soft slap of waves against the hull. At 2:29 a.m., several AN-196 Lyuty drones rose from the waterline and skimmed toward Crimea at an altitude so low that they were almost part of the sea. What followed was a tightly choreographed sequence of reconnaissance, encrypted command uplinks, deceptive decoys, and precision impacts that turned a heavily defended peninsula into a blind zone in minutes. The operation combined low-altitude flight profiles, Doppler notch maneuvers, frequency-hopping communications, and carefully timed strikes to exploit the design assumptions of Russian radars and interceptors. So today, let's explore how Ukraine demonstrated that relatively inexpensive and well-designed drones, guided by modern reconnaissance and resilient links, can neutralize far more expensive systems and reshape the tactical picture almost instantly. Crimea had been transformed into a layered defensive bastion over the previous decade, with radars and missile batteries placed to create overlapping fields of detection and engagement. On the airy ridge and surrounding slopes, long-range systems like Nebo-SV were intended to detect stealthy, high-altitude threats, while mid-range assets such as the 96L6E provided target allocation for S-400 and S-300 batteries. Low-altitude coverage relied on systems like the P-18 Rhetoric and Lyra A-10 to track small, slow, or sea-skimming objects and to guide aircraft into Kacha Air Base. Also, point defenses, such as Pantsir S-1 batteries, were positioned to intercept cruise missiles and UAVs that slipped through outer layers. This architecture assumed a mix of high-altitude aircraft, cruise missiles, and larger UAVs, and it relied on stable radar returns, coherent Doppler processing, and coordinated data links between sensors and launchers. However, surprisingly, the Ukrainian plan attacked those assumptions directly by presenting targets that were tiny, low, and fast, and by using tactics that broke the continuity of radar sweeps and the stability of track files. The strike forced each layer into modes for which it was not optimized, exposing the brittle seams between detection, tracking, and engagement. Now, the AN-196 Lyuty drones used were compact yet cleverly engineered. Their composite airframes soaked up radar energy, giving each a radar cross-section of about 0.05 square meters, roughly the size of a bird, so they were difficult to distinguish from sea clutter while skimming at roughly 13 feet above the waves. Each carried a forward-mounted HEI penetrator incendiary designed to breach composite domes and transmitter housings and then burn into signal processors and power converters. Cruising at a steady 102 miles per hour with tight flight control, the Lyuty held precise attack vectors and dive angles, turning low observability, resilient communications, and focused kinetic effect into a low-cost weapon capable of delivering strategic damage. Ghost 4 and the targeting chain. Above the strike formation, a PD-2 reconnaissance drone with the call sign Ghost 4 acted as the operation's eye. Flying at 2,500 feet, Ghost 4 used infrared imaging to map the Atria slopes and the Kacha airbase, resolving radars, sensors, and even the heat bloom of a K-27 helicopter warming its engines. That helicopter was a critical node, the only platform in the area capable of pairing airborne sensors with ground radars to detect low-flying drones and loitering UAVs. Ghost 4 tagged the K-27 as the first priority and then processed target data locally before uplinking it via a military Starlink network. Within seconds, the strike drones received synchronized target allocations. K-27, 96L6E, Nebo-SV, P-18, Lyra A-10, BK-16 patrol boat, and a Pantsir battery. This real-time reconnaissance and resilient satellite uplink turned the drones into coordinated guided rounds rather than isolated loitering munitions, enabling simultaneous distributed strikes that would overwhelm the defender's ability to reassign sensors and interceptors in time. First engagements and Russian reactions. As the Lyuty formation closed, a Bykov-class patrol vessel off Sevastopol detected faint returns, tiny stable objects moving at a fixed altitude. Initially dismissed as sea clutter, the returns persisted, and the ship's Combat Information Center ordered tracking and missile launch. 5 surface-to-air missiles were fired in semi-active radar guidance, locking onto reflections off the sea surface. The crew believed they had destroyed the targets when the missiles detonated, but the drones remained unshaken. The semi-active seekers had locked onto spurious reflections and failed to discriminate the low, small, and coherent signatures of the Liuti. This first failure signaled a deeper problem. The defenders' sensors and weapons were optimized for larger, higher, or faster targets and could be tricked into wasting expensive interceptors on non-threat clutter. So the Baikov salvo, instead of stopping the attack, revealed the limits of conventional engagement logic against a new class of threat that exploited the physics of radar returns and the geometry of sea clutter. Now, the Pantsir S-1 battery along the southern coastline engaged next, firing 57 E-6E missiles and then switching to its 30mm autocannons when missiles failed to secure kills. The Pantsir is a capable point defense system combining radar and electro-optical sensors with missiles and rapid-fire guns, but it is optimized for certain engagement envelopes. Thus, the Liuti exploited a Doppler notch by flying perpendicular to the radar beam at precise low altitudes, effectively slipping into velocity gates where Doppler processors treat returns as stationary clutter. Missiles guided by semi-active or active seekers could not maintain lock while the proximity fuses failed to trigger because the warheads did not see the expected kinematic signatures. Autocannons produced a spectacular tracer display, but rounds splashed into the sea dozens of feet below the drones. The Pantsir crew faced a problem for which training offered no remedy. The radar was functioning, the weapons were firing, but the physics of the engagement and the drone's flight profiles rendered those weapons ineffective. Inside Kacha Air Base, alarms sounded as the K-27 prepared to lift. The helicopter's heat signature had been identified by Ghost 4 as a critical airborne sensor capable of pairing with ground radars to detect low-flying threats. But before it could become airborne, drone number 1 executed a direct impact on the K-27, the HE-1 penetrator detonating against the fuselage, tearing the rotor mast and igniting fuel. The resulting vertical fireball and shrapnel triggered secondary fires in adjacent radar cabins and navigation stations. In under 20 seconds, Russia's only airborne drone hunter in that sector was gone. The loss of the K-27 removed a mobile sensor that could have extended detection horizons and provided cueing for ground systems, and its destruction created immediate gaps in the defender's situational awareness. With airborne pairing eliminated, the remaining radars had to rely solely on their fixed geometry and degraded track continuity, making coordinated responses slower and less reliable. Now, the next drone targeted the 96 L6E acquisition radar, the allocation brain that fed target designation to nearby S-400 and S-300 launchers. The Liuti climbed to about 60 feet to optimize its attack angle, and then drove its penetrator into the radar's antenna and signal processing core. The explosion shredded radar modules and injected molten copper into the electronics, causing an immediate loss of radio frequency output. With the 96 L6E offline, S-400 launchers in the region lost their target designation feed and dropped into passive standby. Also, the S-400, a strategic air defense system designed to engage aircraft and missiles at long ranges, depends on a network of sensors to provide continuous tracks and engagement solutions. Remove the allocation node and the launchers become static tubes. They retain missiles but lack the sensor inputs to employ them effectively. The neutralization of the 96 L6E thus had an outsized effect, turning a high-value strategic asset into a silent monument. At 2:47 a.m., the third drone performed a dive from 72 feet and struck the dome of the Nebo SV, a radar designed to detect stealthy, high-altitude threats. The HEI penetrator ripped composite panels, peeled the outer shell backward, and burned into the transmitter core, extinguishing the radar's output in a single second. This way, Kacha Air Base lost the ability to detect stealth aircraft and long-range cruise missiles. Almost simultaneously, fourth drone hugged the mountainside at 20 to 26 feet and struck the P-18 Terex antenna base, snapping its rotation shaft and igniting transmission modules. The P-18, optimized for low-altitude detection in cluttered terrain, was reduced to a charred, tilted mesh. Drone number 5 crossed the auxiliary runway and drove into the Lyra A-10's rear service hatch, detonating inside the transmitter core and melting Doppler processors and phase generators. With Lyra A-10 offline, Kacha lost navigational guidance for low-visibility operations. These hits removed the last operational low-altitude and navigation layers, leaving the peninsula's southern flank blind under 330 feet. Within minutes, alarms flashed across Crimea's air defense coordination centers. The S-400 Kuban command post reported no input from the 96 L6E and lost NEBO links, whereas control stations across the peninsula displayed red alerts as sensor feeds vanished. Nearly 40% of the synchronized radar capability covering long-range, mid-range, and low-altitude surveillance evaporated in one night. Pantsir, S-300, and S-400 units retained missiles and guns but had lost their sensor nerve centers and the coordination that made them effective. Russia's Ministry of Defense faced a dilemma: acknowledge a catastrophic failure or suppress the truth. However, Ukraine's HUR posted thermal footage showing drones dodging Pantsir fire, the Ka-27 erupting into flames, and direct hits on the 96 L6E and NEBO SV. The visual evidence amplified the operational damage into a psychological blow. When inexpensive drones can penetrate and destroy the heart of a supposedly hardened defense, confidence in systems, command, and rear area safety erodes. So the strike did not just remove sensors, it undermined the belief that Crimea was an untouchable fortress. Strategic lessons in the new reality. The strike on Western Crimea crystallized several lessons about modern warfare. First of all, asymmetric approaches. Small, cheap drones guided by resilient communications and real-time reconnaissance can defeat expensive, layered defenses by exploiting their design assumptions. Secondly, radar systems optimized for particular envelopes struggle against targets that change altitude, velocity, and signature to exploit Doppler processing and beam geometry. Thirdly, decoys and coordinated timing can draw high-value interceptors and missiles away from real strike elements, multiplying the effect of limited resources. For defenders, the event highlighted the need to rethink sensor diversity, distributed architectures, and rapid reconstitution of degraded networks. For attackers, it showed that ingenuity and precise execution can yield strategic results far beyond the cost of the weapons used. Now, what are your thoughts about this video? Share with us in the comments section below. We would love to read them. Also, if you like this video, share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel.